right? You see these viral videos on the internet and TikTok and these places where you see men talk about how they don't have anyone to talk to. I mean, the data shows that
if your friend was genuinely going through something as serious as the worst possible situation, such as sexual harassment in a workplace, it's difficult to imagine that anyone close to them would respond in a casual, dismissive, or joking manner. However, in the argument being made here, it is suggested that Blake Lively and Taylor Swift allegedly criticized Justin Baldoni's branding and questioned his authenticity, particularly in relation to his public image and his advocacy for feminism, based on the idea that he did not show enough enthusiasm or admiration toward Taylor Swift. The claim being expressed is that he was viewed as less authentic or even less credible simply because he did not appear to fawn over a celebrity or engage in the kind of admiration that others might expect in social or professional settings. From this perspective, Justin Baldoni is described as someone who may have simply been polite, reserved, or not particularly expressive around high-profile figures, rather than someone who actively seeks to impress or overly praise celebrities. Yet that behavior is interpreted by the speaker as being unfairly judged. The broader criticism being made is that Blake Lively and Taylor Swift are being portrayed as self-focused or out of touch, to the point where relatively minor social interactions, such as not recognizing or reacting strongly enough to a celebrity presence, are treated as meaningful vindicators of someone's character or values. The speaker also references an alleged quote attributed to Blake, suggesting that what Justin did in one context was worse than other experiences she described, and uses that as part of their confusion about how comparisons between different situations are being framed. Throughout the discussion, the speaker emphasizes that they try to consider multiple perspectives and not take a purely one-sided view, but they also express that certain text messages and public narratives do not clearly align with the idea that Taylor Swift was actively responding to or recognizing a severe harassment situation. Instead, they interpret the available messages as sounding more casual, social, or even dismissive rather than reflective of someone responding to serious allegations of workplace misconduct. Based on that interpretation, they question whether the evidence being referenced truly supports the claim of severe harassment or coordinated protection of a victim, and they conclude that, in their view, the messaging and behavior being discussed do not clearly match the seriousness of the narrative being presented. The speaker continues, expressing a strongly critical interpretation of the situation, suggesting that certain interactions and messages involving Blake Lively and Taylor Swift reinforced their belief that the dynamics between the people involved were driven more by image, ego, and brand perception than by concern over serious workplace issues. They argue that references to Justin Baldoni's behavior, including disagreements over script changes and professional decisions on set, are being framed in a way that implies he was resistant or difficult simply because he did not automatically agree or go along with requests, which they interpret as him not being overly deferential to celebrity status. In their view, this is tied to a broader idea that he did not fawn over well-known figures, and that this perceived lack of admiration was treated as a negative trait. The speaker further suggests that certain public narratives and alleged text exchanges give the impression of irritation or frustration centered on status, dynamics, rather than on any clearly documented pattern of severe misconduct. And they claim that the tone of some communications appears casual or self-focused rather than reflective of a serious, safeguarding concern. They also bring in their interpretation of Taylor Swift's branding and public image, suggesting that her relationships and public appearances are part of a carefully constructed narrative arc, which they view as more strategic or brand-driven than purely personal. From this perspective, they question the sincerity of the emotional framing they believe is being presented in the broader discourse, arguing that the available messages they have seen do not clearly align with the idea of someone responding to extreme workplace harm. Instead, they interpret the exchanges as reflecting personality clashes, misunderstandings, and conflicts over control or creative direction on set. Overall, the speaker concludes that while they try to consider multiple viewpoints, their reading of the texts and communications leads them to believe the situation is being framed in a way that emphasizes narrative and perception over what they see as clearer evidence of intent or severity. The speaker continues, expanding their interpretation of the lawsuit and surrounding disputes, maintaining a strongly critical view of the parties involved, particularly Taylor Swift, Blake Lively, and Reynolds, while framing the situation as being driven by entitlement, influence, and celebrity power rather than balanced legal or ethical considerations. In their view, the dynamics of the case suggest a pattern where individuals with significant fame and resources expect their objections or preferences to carry greater weight, and where disagreements from others are perceived as obstacles to be managed rather than legitimate points of contention. They argue that this creates a distorted environment in which Professional disagreements and creative conflicts are interpreted through a lens of status and control, rather than being treated as neutral or routine industry issues. The speaker also emphasizes their belief that if there were clear and supportive private communications indicating concern for serious harm, such as explicit messages encouraging someone to leave a dangerous or abusive situation, have surfaced in legal filings or public records. From their perspective, the absence of such messages is meaningful and shapes how they interpret the overall narrative, leading them to question whether the situation is being accurately represented. In terms of severity or intent, instead, they interpret the available text messages as largely reflecting frustration, sarcasm, or dismissive commentary about Justin Baldoni, rather than evidence of coordinated concern about serious misconduct or workplace harm. This interpretation becomes central to their broader skepticism about the claims being made, as they see a disconnect between the tone of the messages and the seriousness of the allegations being discussed. The speaker then shifts into a discussion of recent legal filings and arguments, focusing on responses from Marin's legal team and their approach to countering claims made by Taylor Swift's side. They reference trademark disputes involving Confessions of a Showgirl and Taylor Swift's attempted Life of a Showgirl trademark, presenting the issue as part of a larger legal and branding conflict. In summarizing the filings, they highlight what they interpret as strong, assertive legal language that pushes back against arguments about scale, market presence, and timing. They note that Marin's lawyers challenge the idea that large-scale commercial success should exempt a party from trademark scrutiny. And they also point to arguments about delay in bringing claims and the significance of prior legal precedents, where similar issues were debated. The speaker further describes what they see as inconsistencies in how trademark principles are being applied depending on which side is making the argument, suggesting that positions shift when convenient rather than remaining consistent across cases. They frame Marin's legal response as confident, structured, and strategically aggressive, particularly in how it challenges the opposing arguments and attempts to reframe the legal standards being applied. Overall, the speaker concludes by reinforcing their broader view that the dispute is deeply shaped by power dynamics, branding strategies, and legal maneuvering, and they express agreement with the idea that legal interpretations can appear selective or contradictory depending on which party is advancing them, and how the arguments are being positioned within the broader public narrative.